Hello, this is Paula at Paula's Picks Up Barkman, and I am going to read today books by Bill Peet. Bill Peet wrote a lot of books, and he illustrates and writes them, and quite a while ago. He also was an animator at Walt Disney Studios, and his books are wonderful. But they are rather long. I've never been able to read Bill Peet's books in my regular story time, so I'm taking this opportunity to do so. And the first one I want to read to you is called The Wump World. And it is very, very good for today's world too. The Wump world was a small world, very much smaller than our own world. There were no great oceans, lofty mountains, giant forests, or broad sandy deserts. The Wump world was mostly grassy meadows and clumps of leafy green trees with a few winding rivers and lakes. But it was perfect for the Wumps, who were the only creatures living there. There's their world. The Wumps were simple grass eaters and spent most of their time grazing on the tall, tender grass that grew in the meadows. In warm weather, they cooled themselves in the crystal cool rivers and lakes. And at night, they slept in the shelter of the bumbershoot trees to keep the dew off their backs. Since the Wumps had no enemies, they wandered around just as they pleased, with nothing whatever to worry about. However, the Wumps would have worried if they had known that someone a million miles away was watching their world. There's the Wumps. One morning, the Wumps were awakened by a far-off humming sound. It seemed to be coming from somewhere above, and as the humming grew into a heavy roar, the sleepy-eyed Wumps crept through the trees for a peek at the sky. Zooming straight from the earth came a great flock of pot-bellied monsters with tails and fins, spitting fire and shooting out streaks of black smoke. As the monsters swooped down to land, huge legs sprang from their bulging sides, and like gaping mouths, doors flew open. Then ramps shot to the ground, and down the ramps came a horde of tiny creatures swarming out onto the meadow. These were the pollutions from the planet Pollutus. They had left their worn-out old planet to start a new life in a new world. After such a long journey, the pollutions were overjoyed to find themselves on solid ground once more. There they all are, the little pollutions. They were all prattling with excitement as they followed their leader, the topmost pollution and world chief, across the meadow. At the top of the hill, the chief stopped for a long look at the surrounding countryside. Finally, he said, "Looks good. We'll take it. Plant the flag, Sergeant, and let's get things going." One shrill trumpet blast brought giant machines thundering out of the yawning spaceships, rolling down runways and out onto the meadow. The timid Wumps had been watching warily from the shelter of the trees, and at the sight of the giant machines, they were horrified. "Wump, wump," they cried, and in wild-eyed panic, they went humpity-clumping off through the trees to go diving headlong into the nearest cave. Then down they tumbled, head over heel, through a twisting tunnel to end up huddled together in dark caverns, while the earth-shaking machines rumbled and roared high above. Once they got started, the monstrous machines moved at a furious pace, gobbling up trees and grinding them to bits. More giant machines flattened the ground, followed by great scoopers and scrapers and diggers and gigantic cranes. Soon, the entire Wump world was overrun. The busy little pollutions kept their mighty machines going full blast day and night without let up, in a frenzy to improve their wonderful new world. Suddenly, great cities sprang up, huge factory buildings with towering smokestacks, high-rise apartment buildings and tall office buildings, and above them all loomed the 100-story skyscrapers. Along with the buildings came a tangle of trees and freeways, with on-ramps and off-ramps, overpasses and underpasses, jammed with trucks and buses and cars of all sizes, rushing pell-mell in every direction. It was one great turmoil of noise and confusion, and there was still more to come. Meanwhile, the poor Wumps remained underground, wandering aimlessly through the caverns, feeding on the fuzzy green moss growing on the ledges and the mushrooms clustered in the crannies, and sipping the sweet water from pools fed by underground springs. But they were very unhappy. For all they knew, they might have to spend the rest of their days down there. The Wumps didn't dare venture up to the surface, not even for a peek. They were much too frightened by the endless rumblings and roarings and loud screechings coming from above, and it was growing noisier by the day. There was more and more noise, and more of everything, more buildings and more smokestacks puffing more and more smoke. More freeways with more traffic shootings, out more and more clouds of exhaust, more trash and more trash piles, with more and more waste gushing into the rivers and lakes. Pretty soon, the cities were so clouded by the factory smoke and the fumes from the freeways, the pollutions could barely breathe. They were sneezing and wheezing about the streets, grouching and grumbling and blaming one another for the awful mess that they were in. One day, an angry crowd gathered outside the World Tower building, demanding to see the world chief. When the chief appeared at the balcony, all the pollutions began shouting at once, "We can't breathe the air, we can't drink the water, and we can't stand the noise. We've had enough." "Achoo!" snouted the chief. "I know just how you feel, and something will be done at once. I promise." With no time to lose, the chief called for a meeting with his 3 top outer spacemen. "Gentlemen," he said, "this world of ours has gone sour. We've got to get out of here quick. But first, we must find a new world, a better one. That's your job, men, so get going." "Righto, Chief," barked the men, and within 15 minutes, they were at the spaceport aboard their spaceships. Then zroosh, zroosh, the men took off in 3 directions, and in seconds, they were zooming about in outer space at 7,000 miles an hour. Days passed with no word from the outer spacemen. After waiting a week, the world chief flew into a rage. "Blast it all," he bellowed. "What's keeping those blithering bubble heads?" Then one Monday morning, out of the dark, smudgy sky, swooshed one of the spaceships. As the ship touched down, the man hopped out shouting, "I've done it! I've done it! I've found a new world, a bigger and better world." "Nice going, lad," cried the world chief, and the crowd gathered at the spaceport, giving their hero one good rousing cheer, which ended in a fit of sneezing. In no time, the great news was sent flashing around the world over radio and TV, warning all pollutions to be packed and ready to go within 24 hours. At dawn the next day, the entire population swarmed into the Space Center and crowded aboard the giant spaceships. After double checking to make sure all pollutions were accounted for, the world chief gave the signal for blast off. With a thunderous roar, the giant ship shot off the ground, kazoom, up and away through the smoke blackened sky, and they were gone. And at long last, peace and quiet settled over the Wump world. The sudden silence came as a shock to the Wumps. They could hardly believe their ears. Still, they wanted to take no chances, and so they remained in their caverns with ears cocked for the slightest sound. After a long, long silence, they decided it was time to go. And led by the biggest Wump, they crept up the tunnel to the cave entrance to find it covered by a crust of cement. With one powerful push of his snout, the biggest Wump bumped his way through. Then one by one, the Wumps waddled out onto the freeway and gaped in wide-eyed amazement. They had feared something awful had happened to their world, but this was much more than they could have imagined. They were staggered by the size of the huge buildings with walls and walls of windows looming up at every side, and the broad layers of hard, flat crust covering the earth, which felt strangely cold to their feet. There was no sign of any tree or tuft of grass. Even the sky was gone, and the Wumps wondered if there was anything left for them. At least they must find out. They wandered the freeways for miles, only to find more and more buildings with endless heaps of wreckage and rubble. For all they could see, their world was completely ruined. Footsore and weary, the Wumps were about to give up and head back for their cave when the biggest Wump let out a joyful whoomp. Just ahead of them was a grassy meadow with a clump of bumbershoot trees, all that was left of their lovely world. Wump wumping for joy, the Wumps went bounding off the freeway out into the meadow. Pretty soon, the hungry Wumps were munching away on the tall, tender grass. Now there was new hope for the Wumps. In time, the murky skies would clear up, and the rain would wash the scum from the rivers and lakes. The tall buildings would come tumbling down, and the freeways would crumble away. And in time, the green growth would wind its way up through the rubble. But the Wump world would never be quite the same. The end. So see, it fits today, doesn't it? And now I want to read you a second book by Bill Peet called Big Bad Bruce. But give me a second to get a drink. Those are long books, so I need a drink of water. This is my favorite Bill Peet book, Big Bad Bruce. Forever Green Forest was a quiet, peaceful place until Bruce, a great shaggy brute of a bear, came wandering up out of the canyon one day. A bear of such size was enough to frighten anyone, and the smaller creatures who lived there kept a sharp eye on Bruce in case he might give them trouble. There he is. As long as Bruce was busy rooting around under boulders and logs, searching for a feast of beetles and grub, there was no need to worry. But when the big fellow was feeling frisky and ready for fun, it was time to beware of the bear. What Bruce called fun was to scare the wits out of everyone. The most fun of all for Bruce was rock tumbling. There were lots of rocks in Forever Green Forest, great jumbles of them. With a swipe of his paw, the bear sent them tumbling down the steep slopes, 3 and 4 at a time. The tumbling rocks shattered logs and flattened the bushes and brush, leaving no place for the rabbits and quails to hide. So they took off in a panic to go leaping and dodging and flying pell-mell in every direction. Once he had them on the run. Bruce went rolling around on the ground, exploding into great roaring snorts of laughter. Ha, ha, ho, ho, ho. As long as the bear lived in forever green forest, it would never be peaceful and quiet again. And for all anyone could see, he had come here to stay. Then one afternoon, Bruce made an awful mistake, a terrible blunder. He came across a huge boulder resting on a buff and decided to give it a ride. With a mighty heave, he sent the boulder tumbling down a steep slope. Flumpity, bumpity, wumpity, wump, smashing pine trees and aspens to splinters and leaving deep dents in the ground as it went. In one last big bounce, it landed kerplump in a berry patch, just missing an old woman and her cat by a whisker. It was Roxy, a crafty little witch who was out picking blueberries, and her cat Clinker. Where in blazes did you come from? She shrieked, giving the boulder a vicious kick. How did you get here? Who sent you? Just then, a raucous roar of laughter echoed through the pines, and in a twinkle, Roxy caught sight of the bear on the bluff. So that's who, she cried, and in a fury she went storming up the slope to face the bear. You big lummox, she exploded. You big bumbling brute. That rock could have squashed us to smithereens, and you think it's funny? Ho, ho, chortled Bruce. Ho, ho, he, he. The bear had never seen anything half so funny as the frantic little woman with the wild flying hair. Laugh while you can, warned the witch, but you just wait. I'll have the last laugh, Mr. Bear. Oh, indeed I will. Then she took off like a shot to go streaking down the slope so fast her cat could barely keep pace. And when the witch reached her cabin at the edge of the forest, she hatched a plan. I'll make a pie, she decided, a very special pie for old Mr. Bear. In a flicker of an eye, she made the pie crust, and in a trizzle and a trice, she whipped up a filling of blueberries and honey. Now for the trickery, she muttered, flipping through her magical cookbook to one of her favorite recipes. 1 drop of dwindling, 2 blurps of belittling, a smidgen of minicum, a half teaspoon of twump, a shrift of shortening, and then 1 pinch of kaput should do it. The instant the pie was baked a golden brown and ready to serve, Roxy scurried out the door with it back to the forest. Then, keeping an eye out for the bear, she crept along through the shadows as slinky as a fox. When she reached a small clearing near the spot where she had met the bear, there was not a sign of him. But she could hear him snorting and snooting around in the brush somewhere up the slope. Quickly, she picked out a pine stump, jerked off her apron and flung it over the top, and then put the pie on it. The table's all set, she whispered. Now skit, scat, kitty cat, let's get lost. And they ducked down behind a log, just a hop, skip, and a jump from the stump to wait for old Mr. Bear. They didn't wait long. Pretty soon, a whiffle of breeze sent the sweet aroma of blueberries and honey drifting up to Bruce, and he followed his sniffling nose straight to the stump, snatched up the pie in his paw, and in one chomp and a slurp, it was gone. Ho, ho, crackled Roxy, popping out from behind the log. I tricked you, Mr. Bear. Ho, ho. Did I ever? Bruce didn't like to be surprised, and he let out with an ugly groof. Groof yourself, Roxy shot back. You don't scare me. Just watch out. You don't get pecked to bits by a quail or stomped on by a rabbit. Snurf, snorted the grumpy bear, and he wheeled around and lumbered off into the underbrush. Bruce hadn't gone very far when he began feeling drowsy, so drowsy he could hardly keep his eyes open. So he flopped down against a tree trunk to rest. And in the time it takes for one big yawn, he dropped off to sleep. While the bear slept, he gradually began to grow smaller. Inch by inch and little by little, Bruce dwindled away. He kept shrinking and shriveling until he was down to the size of a possum. And still he kept shrinking. When the diminishing spell was finally finished, the bear had dwindled all the way down to the size of a chipmunk. Bruce was awakened by a sharp peck on the head, and with an angry growl that came out like a squeak, he reared up, all ready to fight. But when he found himself nose to beak with a giant of a quail, Bruce backed off to gape in amazement. Then, as the bewildered bear looked around, he was surprised by 3 more giant quails and a pair of huge rabbits. The rabbits and quail had recognized Bruce, and as they closed in to attack, he quickly turned tail and went plowing headlong into a tangle of brambles. But there was no chance of outrunning the rabbits and the quail in a thicket. They were close on his heels, pecking and stomping the bear with a fury. Bruce didn't dare try to fight back. He kept ducking and dodging his way through the brambles, frantically searching for some place to hide. A gopher hole, a flat rock to squeeze under, any place at all. At last, he stumbled into a forest of cattails at the edge of a creek and in a flying leap flung himself into the water, ker-sploosh, and bobbed up well beyond reach of the rabbits and quails. Then kicking and thrashing with all 4 feet, Bruce headed for the opposite bank, which was a long, long swim for a tiny bear. About halfway across, a sudden swirl of current sent him spinning around and around, upside down and under. Oh, this way. Let me put that down. Bruce was about to be swept down the twisting creek and away forever when he grabbed onto a rock and managed to haul himself out of the water. Then the bruised and bedraggled bear sprawled out on his belly, choking and wheezing and snorting out bubbles until at last he was able to breathe. For a long time, he lay there staring into the swirling stream, trying to figure out what could have happened to make him so small. He wondered if it might have been something he ate. Suddenly, he remembered the blueberry pie and the fierce little woman who had warned him, "Watch out, you don't get pecked to bits by a quail or stomped on by a rabbit." All at once, Bruce realized he had been tricked by a crafty old witch, shrunk by a magic spell. By the time the sun had gone down and deep shadows had crept across the creek, a chilly breeze rippled the dark water, and the soggy, wet bear shivered and shook from the cold and also from fright. Bruce knew that the night hunters were already out on the prowl, and now he was fair game. The jittery bear sat up on his haunches, looking all about in the dark for a sign of danger. He looked everywhere but up, or he would have seen the frowsy old owl peering down from a tree limb above. The fuzzy little brown thing on the rock was a choice tidbit for the owl, and he was just about to swoop down when all of a sudden a screechy voice split the air. "Mr. Bear! Mr. Bear!" With a terrifying hoot, the owl sailed off into the night, leaving the bear to face another kind of danger. In desperation, Bruce scrunched himself up into a ball, hoping the witch would mistake him for part of the rock. But there was no chance of fooling foxy old Roxy, and holding her lantern out over the creek, she spotted the bear in a flash. "Ho, ho!" she crackled. "There you are, Mr. Bear, no bigger than a minute. Quick, quick, Clinker, go fetch him. Skit, scat." Before the bear could even blink an eye, the cat snatched him off the rock by the scruff of his neck and leaped lightly back to the bank. "Good cat," cried Roxy. "Now home we go. But easy does it. That little bear has had a big day." As Bruce had carried him along through the dark forest, he didn't dare put up a struggle. Besides, he was too weary to even lift a paw, and much too scared. He was sure the crafty old witch planned to fix him for good. If she could shrink him down to the runt of a thing, she could turn him into a tadpole or a flea or make him disappear altogether. But to the bear's surprise, the witch turned out to be a kindly old woman and as gentle as could be, just as long as she kept her temper. Roxy loved flowers and birds and animals, especially small animals, and she soon grew very fond of the tiny bear, so she decided to keep him that way. Clinker the cat also took a liking to the bear, and they ate out of the very same bowl and slept in the same corner together under the kitchen stove. Oh, my book is falling apart. Little bears have short memories, and in a few days, Bruce forgot all about ever being a giant of a bear. For all he knew, Roxy's flower garden was a beautiful leafy green forest with plenty of room to roam. Whenever the tiny bear was feeling frisky and ready for fun, he flipped pebbles around as if they were boulders, just to scare the wits out of the grasshoppers, the beetles, and the caterpillars. From a bug's eye view, Bruce was a great, big, hairy, scary, horrible brute of a beast. The end. That is my favorite book. I especially love where he shrunk down. He's such a cute little bear when he shrunk. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed those, and they were really long, but that's what's great about filming stuff is you can stop and look at one and then take a break and look at another one. And I do have a little craft for you because I love this craft. It is a bear painted with forks. There he is. So what you need is you need paint. It's not very much stuff, paint. And I've got a brown bear. You could have a black bear, or if you wanted to do a polar bear, you could have a black sheet of construction paper and paint the white on that. And then you just need construction paper. That's what I made the pink for his ears and the eyes and the nose out of. And then just a marker to make a smile if you want him to smile. And it's very easy. Let's see, where's my fork? Oh, and the best forks to use are ones that are thinner and they bend. Those really thick ones, it's kind of hard to poke it down. So you just get some paint. And I need my other sheet of plain white paper, construction paper. And I'm dipping the fork into the paint. And what I do, because if I don't like draw a circle to guide me, then my bear will have a really odd shaped head. So I take a pencil and just draw kind of a circle. So that guides me of where to put the paint. And then you just push it down and paint, and see, there's my start of my circle. And you can see if I did this, completed this, you would see how bad it would come out because I don't have my circle drawn. But you keep doing it and doing it and doing it until you have a head. And then also the ears I painted too, but you could cut out ears of construction paper and make it. I glued the pink in, I made round eyes, the little nose, drew his mouth, and you can have a bear face. It's a lot of fun to paint with forks. And I would like to tell you, before you go off and paint your bear, that please check out our Create Your Own Castle and Fort contest. You can find the details about that on pueblolibrary.org. And thank you for coming to my story time. I'll see you next week. Thank you.